Blood Herobrine is an entity shrouded in mystery. For years, his more well-known counterpart has haunted Minecraft servers while he hunts his prey from the shadows. What exactly drives this creature's insatiable bloodlust, and how did he come to be? Find out as we reveal the tragic origin of Blood Herobrine. In the dark of night, a lone builder by the name of Blake was being chased by the monsters that roam freely in the overworld. The creatures were thirsty for the blood of innocent bystanders and crept behind him with great haste. In his hand, he held a potion of healing, which he desperately clung onto, as if his very life depended on its safe arrival home. The creaking of bones and hungry moans of zombies grew closer and closer as he ran through the darkness of night. Misfortune had been following Blake like a plague, as if it was hunting him down personally, and he feared that tonight it would finally succeed. He spotted his house in the distance, a beacon of light among the cruel shadows that surrounded him. But the creatures of the night were nearing their prey. Blake flung himself forward and finally reached the dense wood of his front door. He pushed his way inside and slammed it shut, shielding him from the horrors who continued to try and claw their way through. Waiting weakly in her bed was his dying mother, whose mysterious illness had been robbing her of her well-being. Blake didn't know what brought such a horrible disease, but he was doing everything in his power to try and find a cure.
Drink this, Mom. I think this might finally cure you.
Thank you, my boy. I'll try.
Blake's mother weakly gulped down the potion. Unfortunately, it seemed to have no effect on her. All of his hard work was turning out to be fruitless, as his mother's health continued to wane. But Blake was determined to help her. The next morning, Blake and his mother decided to take drastic measures and left the only home they had ever known behind. They began their quest across the land in search of anything or anyone that could cure his mother. Along the way, they would meet hostile tribes that would see them as invaders and send their warriors to attack. Blake was skilled with a blade and did his best to defend his only family, but up against an entire army, he was outmatched. He was forced to prioritize his mother's safety and retreat before it was too late. Other tribes welcomed them with a warm embrace and offered a variety of medicines. However, no matter what they did or where they went, nothing had an effect on his mother, as if someone was dooming their mission to fail from the start. Over the course of their quest, they would encounter countless threats both from the creatures that resided in these realms and the treacherous terrain that stood in their path around every turn. The journey was taxing, and Blake's mom was already gravely ill. It took a toll on her body, and they both knew that without a cure, she had little time left. Nevertheless, they kept up their quest, until one day, Blake's mother collapsed onto the ground.
I'm sorry. I can't go on anymore.
No! Please! Someone help!
Blake's cries attracted the attention of a nearby wandering trader, who rushed to their side and realized the severity of their situation. The kind man took Blake and his mom back to his village, where they were able to take refuge. Blake's mother was too weak to travel any longer, so the quest to find a cure now laid solely within Blake's hands. When he wasn't tending to his mother during the day, Blake would venture out after dark to try and find the miracle that could spare his mother's life. Night after night, Blake would endure the wrath of horrifying monsters and come back empty-handed. For anyone else, the journey would take a toll, but Blake knew he was the last hope his mom had. The moon rose high in the sky as Blake embarked on his next nightly adventure. But as he roamed the overworld, he soon found himself lost in the middle of a strange forest. All around him were trees without leaves, something that was not possible within this world. The air around the forest was cold enough to send a chill up his spine. He wondered if he should turn back. But what if the cure he had been working so hard to find was waiting inside? He couldn't leave any stone unturned, so he begrudgingly continued deeper into the forest. As he wandered through, he couldn't help but feel as if something was watching him from the shadows. He checked over his shoulder and soon was met with a pair of searing white eyes.
Who goes there?
The entity teleported in front of him, causing his heart to nearly stop in his chest. The supernatural creature made him freeze in terror as he spoke to him in an unsettling voice. His name was Herobrine, and he had been watching Blake over the course of his journey. Rather than attacking him like the others, this monster instead offered Blake some assistance.
How about we make a deal? I'll cure your mother, but in exchange, you must bring me a sacrifice whenever I ask. A sacrifice of blood.
Blake's mind raced with thoughts. Could this creature really be the key to curing his mother? Every bone in his body told him that Herobrine was not to be trusted. But after facing so much hardship, the solution to his problems was just within his grasp. Blake gave in to the temptation and accepted Herobrine's offer. The entity reached forward and touched him, and in a flash, Blake woke up in his bed the next morning.
What? Was that all a dream?
Blake looked over and saw his mother standing for the first time in months. She was finally well enough to walk again. In tears, Blake embraced his mother, and the two of them began their new lives in the village together. They would spend the daytime having fun and growing new crops, but at night, when his mom was sound asleep, Blake would sneak out. He would break into the pens of the villagers' livestock and slaughter them in cold blood with his iron blade. Once he had enough bodies, he would drag them into the forest and present them to Herobrine as a sacrifice to keep his end of the deal. Although the villagers were wary of his mother's spontaneous recovery and the disappearance of their animals, Blake was able to keep up the ruse. One night, Blake went to the forest to offer his animal sacrifice to Herobrine. The air was stinging cold, and the world around him seemed to be enveloped in an inky darkness, unlike anything he had seen before. But he pushed his unease aside and presented his offering to the creature. What would come next would change his life forever.
You have served me well, but I'm afraid an animal's blood will not do. This time, I require the sacrifice of a villager.
Blake felt his blood run cold. Many animals died each day for food, but killing a villager was different. After their people were kind enough to accept him and his mother into their village, he would have to slaughter them in return? He turned to say no, but Herobrine's glance pierced through him. In that moment, he knew he didn't have a choice. He returned to the village and waited in the shadows for his unsuspecting victim. A lone villager walked by, and he took his chance to strike. Blake jumped at the passerby, but to his horror, he realized it was the wandering traitor that had saved him and his mom before. He hesitated. Could he really repay this man's kindness with violence?
Blake, what are you doing?
I'm sorry, but I need to protect my family.
With tears in his eyes, Blake struck down the villager, took the body, and returned to Herobrine with his blood sacrifice in tow. With his dark debt fulfilled and Herobrine sated, Blake went home and lied in bed, but he didn't get a minute of sleep after what he had done. In the days that followed, Herobrine continued to demand more villager blood sacrifices. Unable to refuse the dark creature, Blake would kill any villager foolish enough to leave their house after sunset. Word began to spread around the village about mysterious disappearances, causing unease in everyone. The once joyous village was reduced to one of fear and hiding. Nobody suspected Blake, but the nightly slaughters started to take a toll on him. His guilt kept him up at night, and any moment of sleep he did get was filled with terrifying nightmares. The sleep deprivation was so bad that Blake would see illusions of horrifying entities haunting him around every corner. Even his mom would take notice as her son spiraled deeper into darkness. The unrest in the village began to boil over. Their people demanded that all outsiders were to be banned, forcing Blake and his mother to migrate elsewhere. They traveled through the overworld in search of a new home, but each village they passed rejected them, as the story of disappearing villagers continued to spread throughout the land. Him and his mom had no choice but to face the horrors of night by themselves. All the while, Herobrine would continue to visit Blake, pushing him to raid unsuspecting villages to keep the monster at ease. They had nowhere to go, until one day a builder found them camping in the woods.
You folks shouldn't be out here in the cold. Come with me.
Blake and his mother followed the builder to his civilization, where they were welcomed with open arms. For the first time in weeks, they had a warm bed to sleep in and delicious food to satisfy their hunger. However, a sense of dread still hung heavy over Blake. He knew that once night arrived, Herobrine would appear and demand his next sacrifice. The sun began to set on the builder society, and everyone laid down in their beds for the night. Blake waited in anticipation for Herobrine, but as the night came and went, the entity never arrived. Once morning came around, Blake finally felt a sense of hope he hadn't in months. Perhaps this was finally his chance to start a new life with his mom. Overjoyed, Blake and his mother built their very own home within the confines of the Builders Society. They spent day after day, flourishing and making friends with other builders. At last, Blake felt happy, but as he went to sleep for the evening, Herobrine appeared at the foot of his bed. He was horrified, as the dark power once again returned to terrorize him.
I hope you enjoyed your break, but now it's time for the next sacrifice. I want the blood of a builder.
Blake was shocked. The thought of killing another villager made him feel sick, but killing a builder like himself was something he couldn't fathom. As Herobrine stared him down with his lifeless glowing eyes, he felt just as powerless as before, but the months of terror that he had experienced replayed within his mind. Blake couldn't return to that life, not after finally finding joy once again. He stood from his bed and drew his sword against the monster. This time, he wasn't going to be compliant. He struck at Herobrine with his blade, blade, but like slicing a ghost, it passed through nothing but air as the entity teleported to safety. In response, Herobrine's searing white eyes filled with rage. Blake had made a grave mistake.
You dare defy me? That little episode of yours will now cost you and your mother your lives.
Herobrine exploded out of the house as lightning started to rain down around him. He began to terrorize the Builder village in a fit of rage. The Builders woke to the ruckus and tried to fight back with their weapons, but Herobrine refused to fall to their feeble attempts. He summoned Illagers to terrorize their home while continuing his onslaught on everyone and everything around him. Blake rushed to his mother's side and woke her up, urging her to run while they still had the chance. She sat up to see a horrifying entity destroying everything they had worked so hard to build.
Blake, what is that thing?
There's no time to explain. We have to run.
The two of them fled from the Builder village, escaping with nothing but their lives intact. Blake and his mother once again lost their only home and had nothing except for each other. But now they were also on the run from Herobrine. They traveled from town to town, desperately trying to take cover from the horror that followed them. But no matter where they head, Herobrine will return, leaving destruction in his wake. He destroyed countless cities and forced Blake and his mother to constantly be on the run. Neither of them were able to sleep at night, both certain that somewhere in the dark forest a pair of glowing white eyes were watching their every move. The nightmares returned along with the visions of haunting creatures. The only thing that made his life bearable was the companionship of his mother. As long as they had each other, Blake rationalized, they would make it through the suffering. However, one morning, Blake woke up to find his mother burning with fever. Now that Herobrine's deal was broken, her illness was beginning to return. He did everything in his power to tend to his sick mother, but the disease was progressing faster than before. They were traveling less and less throughout the day before his mom was unable to walk, and it was clear that she would soon be completely bedbound.
I'm only holding you back. That thing is going to catch us. Please continue without me.
No, I'll figure something out. I promise.
Determined to save the only thing he had left in this world, Blake knew he needed to take drastic measures. He set off in search of a way to stop Herobrine for good. He spoke to different people along his travels for any information on the elusive creature, but nobody knew anything about him. Blake was about to lose hope until a witch in a purple robe approached him. She told him that she knew of a library that could hold the information he was seeking. Desperate for a lead, he took her offer and arrived at the abandoned building. The area was surrounded by an aura of dread and covered thick in spider webs, but he hoped to find the answers he was looking for inside. He spent hours scouring the dusty shelves for information on Herobrine to no avail, until he spotted a strange lever behind a shelf. Blake flipped the switch, and a cursed tome revealed itself before him. He picked up the book and read through its tattered pages. It was full of forbidden spells and rituals that had been cast out for centuries. But on the final page, he discovered a ritual that claimed to be strong enough to defeat Herobrine, the entity that was argued to be older than the world itself. He knew in his gut that performing such a dangerous ceremony could backfire, but every second he wasted was a second his mom grew sicker. Blake closed the book and kept it close to him. He knew what he had to do next. That night, Blake set out and began to prepare the materials he needed to perform the ritual in the book. The weeks he spent traveling left him with very few tools, so in order to get what he needed, he resorted to theft. He scouted out nearby villages and invaded them for their items, as well as slaughtered their livestock for ritual sacrifices. Blake would do this night after night, doing more and more demanding tasks as the materials became harder to find. He became obsessed with his studies to the point he was driven to starvation. He didn't want to waste a single moment, not even to cook his food, so he consumed raw meat as he continued with his destructive habits. As time passed, he was unaware that his very body was beginning to change. His mouth and hands were stained in blood from all of the animals he had killed and eaten, and his eyes began to glaze over from the lack of sleep. His erratic behaviors only worsened as his paranoia grew stronger each day. He saw passing figures that didn't exist, and would think about nothing but the ritual that he was working tirelessly to prepare. Even in her weak state, his mother could see that her beloved son was losing himself.
Blake, maybe you should take a break today. I'm worried about you.
If I do that, that thing is going to kill us. I can't let you die.
Blake ignored the pleas of his mom and continued working. Even more time passed, but finally he placed down the last item he needed. The ritual was ready. Blake took his mother into a cave where she could stay hidden during the encounter. He was ready to end all of this and return to a peaceful life with his mom. Knowing that this wasn't right, his mother tried to talk him out of it, but Blake had given too much of himself for this. He refused her and stormed off, determined to follow through with his plan at any cost. He returned to his ritual and lit the campfires around it.
I know you're watching! Come and face me, Herobrine!
The terrifying entity that had been terrorizing Blake and his mother finally revealed himself. Herobrine hovered over his victim, looking down on Blake as if he were a mere insect compared to the strength of his dark powers. Blake took his chance and cut his own hand, using his blood to start the ritual. The circle beneath them began to glow as Herobrine was pulled down into the center of it. Blake felt his heart race. This was the moment he was waiting for and worked so hard to achieve. Him and his mom would soon be freed from Herobrine's curse. Herobrine struggled against the blood ritual, but just as Blake thought he had been defeated, the creature began to laugh.
You fool! You can't defeat me with darkness! You're mine now!
Suddenly, Blake found himself being dragged into the center of the circle. He tried to run, but the force was too strong as he was sucked into his own ritual. Herobrine corrupted him, taking Blake's body for himself. The sky turned blood red as the two merged into a mutated form. His mouth elongated into something unnaturally large, and he gained rows of razor-sharp fangs. Together, Blake and Herobrine formed the new entity known as Blood Herobrine. Any consciousness Blake had was completely lost. The only thing that consumed his mind now was his insatiable hunger for blood. The monster sped through the forest, slaughtering anything that dared come to his path. As he did, he discovered the cave that his mother was hiding inside and stormed into it to find her shivering in the corner in fear.
Who are you? Where is my son?
Blood Herobrine approached her, completely unaware that she was the very person he had sought out to protect. As he came closer, Blake's mother shrieked in horror.
Save me!
Upon hearing his old name, Blood Herobrine stopped in his tracks. The final shred of sanity he may have had tried to hold him back, but his insatiable hunger took control. He lunged at his own mother, swallowing her until nothing remained. But even after his feast, he was still hungry. His bloodlust would never be satisfied, and he would kill for the rest of time, just like how Herobrine had arranged from the very beginning.